Welcome to A Fine Time, The Nanny Revisited. This is a podcast about The Nanny, where we recap each episode and then discuss, sharing our own unique take on each episode. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Debbie. Today, we're talking about episode 17, Stop the Wedding, I Want to Get Off. As usual, we're going to start with a brief summary of the episode. On the phone with Jocelyn, the sister Cece didn't know Maxwell had, Maxwell learns that Jocelyn is coming for a visit and, for the first time ever, is bringing a man home to meet the family. Jocelyn brings home Nigel, the Duke of Salisbury, announcing that they are engaged. Nigel and Jocelyn explain how it was love at first sight. He thought she was suitable, and she thought, well, he seems nice. Fran offers to plan the wedding, and Jocelyn and Nigel decide to get married the following Sunday to get out of plans with the Worthingtons. Fran finds Jocelyn's lack of enthusiasm about the details of her wedding unusual, concluding that she doesn't actually love Nigel, but rather is in love with her chauffeur, Lester. On the wedding day, Fran promises Maxwell that she's not going to say anything to Jocelyn, but then she makes a beeline for Lester and gives him the push he needed to share his feelings with Jocelyn. Nigel catches his bride kissing Lester, and Nigel decides to sneak out the back instead of bowing out gracefully. Lester instead takes his place at the altar. After the wedding, Fran and Maxwell comment on how crazy it is for people to rule out love just because of class before parting for the night, with a very meaningful look. Bernadette, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think that's a good summary.
Thank you. You want to talk to us about scene 1?
Yes, so we open up and we're in Maxwell's office. He's on the phone, one of the cordless phones.
Good point.
And at first, well, I'll back up. So it's Maxwell's in the office, and then Cece and Niles are also in the office. At first, we're not sure who Maxwell is talking to on the phone, because he mentions, "Oh, I love you too," that kind of stuff. And Cece kind of asks Niles, "Well, who's he talking to?" And Niles explains it's his sister.
Well,
from
no,
London.
Niles doesn't. Niles says to her, "What's it worth to you?"
Oh, okay.
Right? And
Mhm.
before she can answer, Maxwell, puts his hand over the phone, like, because there's no mute button, right?
Mhm.
And he says, "It's my sister Jocelyn." And then Cece says, "I didn't know Maxwell had a sister." And then Niall says, "Now we see what you're worth to him."
Mhm.
Anyway, go
You're
ahead.
right.
Sorry.
But yeah, because basically, of course, Niles does not lose any chance of doing any kind of barbs at Cece. Um, but again, we learn it's his sister from London who Cece didn't know about. But of course, Fran walks in and immediately knows about Jocelyn. Uh, um, and of course, Cece's kind of like, well, how did she know? And Niles, classic Niles, is like, he talks in his sleep,
Correct.
which is, again, he just loves to get in those digs at Cece.
Yeah. Can I just add one little thing?
Mhm.
So, as you pointed out, Fran knows that Maxwell has a sister, but it's not just like she knows. She's like, "Oh," she doesn't say, "Oh, it was your sister. Cool." She says, "Oh, I hope you said hi to her from me."
Yes.
Like, as
Yeah.
if they had some sort of like relationship, which we
Yes.
sort of know they don't.
Yeah. And then, uh, you know, Maxwell explains that, oh, apparently Jocelyn's coming for a visit and she's bringing a man. And Niles is like, ham? And Max is like, I'm pretty sure she said man. And of course, at first Fran assumes, oh, is she, ugly, essentially. There's different words she uses. Is she the hound to the Baskerville?
Is the poor girl? Is she the hound of the Baskerville? Yeah.
Yes. And Niles is like, no, 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 no. It's just that she's never brought anyone home. She's actually, lovely.
Right.
But
She's
never
very
brought
attractive.
Mm-hmm. And then uh, and then of course Fran has to connect it to a relative.
Yep.
So she's like, oh yeah, like my cousin Gladys. Um but if you ever need your radiator cleared or whatever, she's your man. So again, kind of implying, oh, maybe, she's a lesbian.
Correct.
So yeah. Anything else you want to add to that particular scene?
I mean, I like that scene. One thing, I guess, back to the well, two things I want to add. One, how does Cece not know that Maxwell has a sister? Right? They've had this business relationship. They've been in each other's lives for a really long time. I mean, obviously, it speaks to Cece and who she is that she just doesn't retain that type of information. But it's still one of those things where you're like, that's a little weird, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one point. And then the second point, after Fran comes into the office, just because I really like this point, Maxwell hangs up and he looks confused and he says that Jocelyn's coming for a visit and she's bringing home a man. And Fran says, "Oh, what a lovely hostess gift! Hostess gift. I hope she knows my size."
Yes.
So, because she just
I'm glad you pointed that out.
I think that's delightful. Those are the only two things I wanted to add to the scene. So then
take this later.
I'm happy to do so. So the next scene, in scene 2, we find Niles in the foyer again, dealing with the flowers, what he was doing sort of in episode 5, Here Comes the Brood. And he's playing with the flowers, and Fran comes downstairs wearing, I'm not going too far into our fashion, but just because it's relevant, she's wearing a suit, sort of. It's a 2-piece outfit. It's pants and a shirt, and it's pink with like newspaper print on it. And she basically is coming to ask Niles for his opinion because she wants to make a good impression on Maxwell's sister. And without even looking at her, Niles says that perhaps you should try something more conservative. And Fran says, "You didn't even look at me." And he glances, "Okay, now I've looked." He knew whatever she wore, he was going to say she should do something more conservative. Anyway, the doorbell rings and Maxwell races to the door, and he and his sister, the woman who we find out is his sister, greet each other with Puddle Duck and Mopsy. They have these cute little nicknames for each other, and he like pokes her nose, and they're very familial. They sort of regress to who they were when they were children, which is very cute, and it's not something we see Maxwell do very often. And Fran kind of just like looks at them, and Maxwell says, "What, didn't you have a nickname for your sister?" And she's like, "Yeah, moron." And so then at that point, Jocelyn waves in Nigel Waters, Duke of Salisbury, and Fran, of course, immediately jumps to saying, "Oh, I love your steaks," thinking that he's connected to Salisbury steak. He plays along. He's a good sport about it and says, "Thank you, Lord Worcester," and I totally mispronounced that. Sorry, lovely listeners. "And I get together every Sunday for a barbecue," Maxwell adds, "and the Earl of Sandwich pops by for leftovers." And all the Brits are laughing, and Fran's like, I don't get it. Whatever. And so then in comes Lester, who is Jocelyn's chauffeur and has been for, I think it was like 20 years. And Maxwell just doesn't recognize him. And Lester says, "Oh, don't feel too bad. You've probably only ever seen the back of my head," at which point he mocks driving. And Maxwell's like, "Oh, yes, of course." And then he recognizes him. So they're having a conversation, and Fran, I can't remember exactly what Fran laughs at, but Jocelyn says, "Maxwell, you described her laugh all wrong in your letters. It's nothing like the QE2 adrift in a fog." And Fran gets this like smile on her face. "Mr. Sheffield, you've been writing about me?" And he's like, "Oh, yes." And then they like move on quickly because he doesn't want to get into it. And so he asks about the couple's trip, and they talk about how the flight was fine. They had massages on the plane. And Fran says, "Oh, wow, some plane. The last Super Saver I took, I didn't need a brassiere. I had my knees," which is sort of amusing because this is from the early 1990s. And my understanding is seats and the space between seats on airplanes has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, including in recent years. So that comment was before its time. But what is interesting to me there is basically Maxwell basically puts something in her mouth again to shut her up so she can't say anything else. And this is not the first time we've seen him do it. This is at least the second time. The other time that comes to mind is back in, I think it was episode 13, Maggie the Model, when Chloe Simpson was there and Fran just kept talking and Maxwell was just like putting food in her mouth.
But what's interesting is he even, like, as he does it, he says, let's pop some food in there.
Exactly.
Like he's verbalizing it, not just doing it.
Correct. Because he finds that as a way to get her to be quiet, which I'm not going to lie, I don't really care for. But okay. Anyway, back to the scene. And so, Jocelyn and Nigel are sitting on the couch and Fran asks, was it love at first sight? And Nigel says, yes. The moment I laid eyes on her, I thought, God, she's suitable. And Jocelyn adds, and the moment I saw him, I thought, he seems nice. And then it comes out that they're engaged. And go ahead. Sounds like you want to say something.
Nigel actually is like, should you tell him or should I? And she goes ahead and says, we're engaged. And he's like, I guess you would, or something.
Exactly. Go ahead, dear, or something. Yeah. And Fran gets super excited. Like, we've never had a Duke in the family. Well, we did that one time, but we had to put him to sleep. But like she goes and she like hugs Jocelyn, who looks startled, and then she and Maxwell are about to hug, and like Fran seems to be the most excited person in the room.
She says, I gotta call my mother.
Exactly.
Pick up the phone. Which I just thought of while you were talking is, how she acted when Maxwell was on the phone in the previous scene, as you mentioned, oh, I hope he said hi on my behalf. I'm like wondering, to what extent has Maxwell talked to her about Jocelyn? Is this like she feels like she knows Jocelyn because Maxwell's talked about her so much? Or is this just general Fran, wanting to be close to people? You know what I mean?
No, that's an interesting question. I think it's probably a combination. But I think it's more, to the second part, like Fran wants to be close to people and she sees the Sheffields as her family, right? Kind of like we saw last week, the Fine family sees the Sheffields as family. And so Jocelyn is important to Fran and to Fran's family because Maxwell and his kids are important to them.
Yeah. I will just note as well that the demeanor of the Duke and Jocelyn in this scene when they're talking about, he delivers the line, my God, she's suitable, like in a very dry British way, if that makes sense. Like very, I don't know if I can describe it very well, but it's not the passionate, my God, she's suitable. It's, my God, she's suitable. Like kind of like matter of fact.
Yeah, and kind of flat.
Yes. Which is important.
Yes.
And at first you're like wondering maybe, oh, are they just kind of really digging into like British stereotypes here? But
time will tell. Yeah.
Yes. Although I will say, I kind of saw like as soon as Lester came in the first time, I kind of saw where this was going.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, you also knew the title of the episode, I take it. So that probably gave some of it away.
Yeah. Like it could have been though if, with Fran offering, well, we're not there yet. So
okay. Sorry.
I'll hold off on that. All right. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that scene?
I don't think so. Is there anything you want to add?
I don't believe so. So let's go to the dining room.
Okay, perfect.
I'm assuming it's dinner, and because it's kind of dark out, and Niles has prepared steak and kidney pie, which Fran is not really a big fan of this.
No.
At least her mother stayed away from organs, or what did she say?
Urinary tract.
Oh, urinary tract. Okay. And then innocent little Gracie is asking about, what about the fish or something along those lines.
I have that if you want me to.
Yeah, if you want to.
So Gracie innocently says, "So did you and Uncle Nigel have fun on the boat?" "What boat?" "Fran said you hooked a really big fish."
Uh-huh.
Which is
Yeah.
true, but it's not a cold-blooded one.
Yeah. Um, and the Duke of Salisbury actually realizes, oh, we forgot to get presents for the children. How about some money? And of course, Maxwell, immediately is like, no, 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 it's fine. And Brighton is like, hey, he was talking to us.
Exactly.
And the Duke's also kind of like insisting, like, are you sure I have plenty of it? I won't miss it. So it's like, subtle flexing or not so subtle flexing, but he says it so matter of factly.
Exactly.
And then Fran's chastising Brighton, like, Brighton, don't be greedy. God will punish you. And in walks Cece. And Fran turns to Brighton and says, see?
Exactly. And where does Cece sit down?
She sits at the end, like, well, okay, so Maxwell, as per usual, is like at the head of the table. Fran, if we're looking at the scene, is to Maxwell's left, and the sister is to his right. So the Duke of Salisbury is next to Jocelyn, and then Cece sits next to him.
I thought she sat next to Brighton.
Oh, sorry, you're right. Duke of Salisbury, Brighton, and then Cece.
Correct. So that is the punishment, that not only is Cece there, Cece is sitting next to him.
Yep, right next to him. And Cece introduces herself. Not only though is she um the business partner, but she's kind of like family. And Niles, classic Niles, is like, oh yes, we try to put her out at night, but she always finds her way back home.
Back in, yep.
Yep. And Fran, meanwhile, is still so excited about, the prospect of a wedding. And she's like, well, you might want to go ahead and book a banquet hall
You
or
need to set a date so you can
yeah,
book a banquet hall. And if you want to book an accordion, you have to move fast.
yes,
Which,
yes.
how many weddings have you been to where there's been an accordion? Just
Um,
curious.
uh, none that come to mind.
That was my take too. Like, I didn't realize that an accordion was like a hot commodity when it came to weddings.
Yeah, yeah, none come to mind. But yeah, but then, Fran explains, she, well, okay, Maggie jumps in first and says
Right.
that Fran was an assistant director.
It was a bridal consultant at Danny's Parisian Brides for Less. And
Yes.
Fran says something like, she
Oh,
says something sort,
Maggie,
yeah, something
as
sort
if
of like
she's gonna be
downplaying it.
humble, but then
Right.
corrects it to like
Head bridal,
director. Or yeah,
head
head
bridal
writer.
consultant.
Yeah. And so Fran offers, oh, I can help you plan it. I still have my Rolodex.
Yep.
He has plenty of connections. Um, Meanwhile, like I think Cece makes another comment that I don't have written, but Niles kind of throws the plate in front of her.
He
Um,
does.
did you notice that?
I did notice um, Niles doing that. Oh, yes.
Mhm.
She makes a thing. Sorry, it took me a minute to get there. Yeah, because so Niles was serving over by the banquet, whatever. Um, and Cece makes a snide comment about, I can picture something like, I can picture it now, the Duke and Duchess of Salisbury on opposite ends of a 10-foot hero.
Yeah. And then Niles just kind of somewhat throws the plate in front of her.
And notice that her roll bounces off the plate.
Yeah.
That's how I remembered it was a hero. Anyway, continue.
And then they're asked what their plans are for Sunday, and they have something with the Worthingtons, but
I have this if you want it.
okay, sure.
So Jocelyn turns to Nigel. Darling, are we free this Sunday? No, we're golfing with the Worthingtons. And then she responds, oh, pooh. I hate the Worthingtons, and I don't much care for golf. So he comes up with a logical solution of, then let's get married. It's the perfect excuse.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's also matter of fact, like very, I don't know, casual in some ways. Um,
It's
and then
disinterested, even. It's
yeah, you know what? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like it's just another thing.
right.
But he notes that he wants to keep things simple. And Fran approves. She's like, yeah, I always say put the money toward the castle.
Yep.
What?
Yes, I'm agreeing. Yes.
Yeah. And then, she tells him Mazel Tov, which is pip pip in British.
In
As far as,
Yiddish.
no, pip pip in British.
I think she says Mazel Tov is pip pip in Yiddish, not British, because
Oh.
pip pip would be in British.
Mm-hmm. Well, it could be either way that like she's saying pip pip, like Mazel Tov is the equivalent of pip pip in British.
Ah, okay. Now I see. One
Yeah.
of us. Okay. Either way. Yes.
It works either way. She's
Yes.
equating Mazel Tov with pip pip.
Yes.
And then, she's making she goes up and she's kind of scooping her food back into the serving dish. And
Yes.
this is Fran, and she tells, you know, uh, Niles this is something he can forget, off of his repertoire. And he points out, well, this is one of Lady Diana's favorites. And I didn't like this comment, but she replies with, oh, maybe that's why she's always throwing up. Because I
Yeah.
believe that Princess Diana had revealed that she had like bulimia and stuff. So I didn't really care for that.
Although I wonder, did she reveal that she had bulimia before or after this episode aired? And does that make a difference to you?
Not particularly. I
Okay.
mean, I still think it's not. I mean, the implication of whenever you're talking about throwing up, like, I don't know. And I can't remember when the tell-all, like that famous interview with Lady Diana was, if that was in 94 or 95. But anyway, I mean, I think to some extent it's even worse if she knows that she has bulimia. But
According to Google, the
Mhm.
tell-all interview was in 1995. In the Martin Bashir interview, I think is the one you're talking about. It was broadcast in late 1995.
Okay. And then this episode would have been early or
Uh,
94?
It would have been. I'm trying to figure out when it would have aired. Oh, I believe, according to
It's March
it was
16th,
March. Yeah,
1994.
yeah. So it's like a year and a half beforehand.
Yeah. And obviously, like, I was not really into all of the tabloids back then. Even now, I'm not. But I don't know what would have prompted that comment then prior to, unless she had revealed that in a different interview. I don't know. Anyway, I just was not particularly fond of that little comment. But
No, that's fair. The one thing I'll comment on, because I sort of thought it was amusing, the discussion of the steak and kidney pie, because at the very beginning of that scene, Fran makes a comment, and you all complained about my mother's cooking. At least she steered clear of the urinary tract. You referenced it before, but to me, like, that ties back to the episode we talked about last week, where people were concerned or disgusted about eating tongue or stuffed derma, and yet steak and kidney pie is seen as totally fine. So I like the poking fun at.
Yeah.
That's it. The last thing you pointed out, that Fran was scooping her food back into the serving dish. That I don't think is proper manners.
Yeah. And especially right in front of Niles, who cooked it.
Right. And also, like, everyone else who maybe wanted seconds before that.
Yeah.
So was there anything else you want to say about scene 3?
I don't think so.
Okay. So then in scene 4, we find Gracie sitting on the steps, and she looks concerned. And so she's telling Fran that she's really worried about serving as the flower girl for the wedding. And she says, I can't be a flower girl. It's too much pressure. What if Aunt Jocelyn slips on my petals and falls and breaks her leg? Then we'd have to shoot her like my pony. Which is such a interesting. Yeah, I was trying to figure out what it is. Definitely dark, but also it reveals that she had a pony at some point.
Yes.
what
it's
kid didn't want a
working on
pony?
several levels here.
Exactly. What kid didn't want a pony? Anyway, so Fran tells her to go try out some of the aromatherapy she bought her, and Gracie's like, "The sage? No, I think that's for PMS. Try the lavender." And so Gracie goes upstairs to like try to calm her fears and her stress. And the doorbell rings, so Fran gets it. And who is it but Kenny, the 17-year-old neighbor we met last week? He arrives with this really big box, and he's, you know, looking around at the house, and he's sort of amazed, and he's sort of come to the conclusion that Maggie's out of his league. And Fran tries to reassure him, this is just an average, ordinary house. Oh, excuse me a moment. I have to go ask the butler something. So she goes over to Niles and says, have you seen the Duke? And she's told, oh, he and Mr. Sheffield went yacht shopping.
Yep.
Like, totally a normal, ordinary, average house, right? Anyway, so then Maggie and Jocelyn show up and they're in their riding gear, and Kenny decides to bolt. He changed his mind. He was originally gonna help out with the wedding, but this was too much for him. And so Jocelyn comes in, and Fran says, wait till you see what I had, sent over from the bridal shop. And she opens the box and pulls out this big white dress. And she says, it's a genuine copy of a knockoff of, I think, an Yves Saint Milan. I didn't catch the exact name of the knockoff.
Yeah, I didn't catch it either. So
but
close enough.
Yeah, okay, cool. Sorry, I don't know my bridal designers. But anyway, she's like holding this dress up, and Jocelyn's like, it sort of screams like I'm getting married, or like she's uncomfortable with how like showy it is. And Fran says, well, honey, you're marrying a duke. If it were me, I'd be throwing leaflets out of the Goodyear blimp, and my mother would be flying it. Which I think is just like a comical, first off, it's a comical image, but also it shows the like sort of the appropriate level of excitement for marrying a duke, right?
Or just anybody.
Oh, okay, or just anybody. Fine. Good point. So
like,
Fran
I would expect you would be excited or like, I don't know. It could differ person to person, but yeah, go ahead.
No, that's fair. But like the point is, like, you should be excited is what she's saying to Jocelyn. Like, you should be ecstatic. You should be thrilled. And so Fran says, we need some details about you and the betrothed. And the first question is, what's your favorite song? Like, they don't have one. And so Fran rattles off a number of songs: Evergreen, Close to You, Duke of Earl. And Justin's like, well, what's your favorite song? And Fran says, well, I'm partial to You Gotta Shop Around, but that's better for that's more for a shower. And Justin's like, well, I guess let's flip a coin. Like, she's still, just like Nigel before, she's still kind of blasé about it. And so Fran sort of cuts right to the quick and says, you love the Duke, don't you? And Jocelyn's response is sort of very telling. Who wouldn't? He's solid and dependable. And best of all, his mother's dead. There's nothing there about like how he makes her feel or how much she loves him. It's just, he's there, he's dependable. Cool. Oh, and his mom's dead. So Jocelyn, Fran starts trying to list off the other things that they need to do, like the flowers and the seating chart and the yarmulkes. Oh, wait. Okay, we can cross that off. So that gives us some time. And Jocelyn's basically like, I'm going to leave the little details to you. And she starts walking off, and she's like, Lester? And she calls for Lester, and he pops up like immediately. And Fran says, what took you so long? But she decides she wants to go for a drive around the park, and Lester read her mind. And so Fran asks Lester, like, maybe you can, tell me what's her favorite color, what's her favorite drink, and he's able to rattle off all the information like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and that's like, as Jocelyn's already walked out. And so Lester's following her. And so Fran's kind of trailing after him, asking these questions. And like you said, immediately, roses, peach, and then something I didn't catch. But and Jocelyn's demeanor too kind of brightened with
being Lester.
Yes. Yeah. Um, the only thing I would add earlier, I don't know if you mentioned this, when, because Kenny's really intimidated and, Fran's kind of reassuring Maggie's a down to earth. And when she comes in, she obviously had just been riding a horse with the aunt. And, like you said, Kenny's just kind of out of there.
Yep.
And, but Maggie seems a little confused. And Fran kind of says, oh, it's the leather boots,
It's a
for,
Jewish thing.
yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so anything else you wanted to add to that
No,
scene?
that's all I had for scene 4. Do you want to do scene 5?
Yes. So we're in the kitchen and it's Fran and Niles. And Fran is explaining that she's getting kind of a strange vibe from this wedding. She hasn't had this since the cleaning girl was trying to get her green card, and even she had a song picked out. Um, Niles is trying to explain, well, the British are not known and I kind of, it says believe in my notes. I don't know if that's correct. In like big show, like big emotions. I don't know, essentially. Do you have that or no?
I have what happened before that, and then what
Okay.
happened after that.
Okay. Well,
Fran
I mean,
says,
essentially, Niles is trying to say, like, oh, it's a British thing. Like, it's not that weird.
right, he says something like, British women aren't known for showing their emotion, showing their love or something like that. And he makes a comment like, Lord God knows I know, or something like that.
Uh-huh. And then Fran's like, well, what? I was engaged with Danny. And Niles kind of like, looks at her and she's like, okay, pre-engaged to Danny. I knew about his favorite, all types of things, including his favorite back wax. The
Yep.
only thing I didn't catch was, him having an affair with Heather. And then Niles was like, well, you know his favorite hobby now. Um,
Sorry.
yeah. So then, Fran though is like, oh, you should feel like you're swept off your feet and all this. And of course, that's when Jocelyn comes in being princess carried by Lester.
Yep.
Um, and they're kind of like bright and, like, oh, like I took a tumble and he's carrying in. Um, and Niles and Fran kind of watch this, and Fran's like, okay, at least I know the song, baby, you could drive my car.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's a fairly quick scene, but again, you definitely see the chemistry.
Mm-hmm. The
Anything
connection
you wanted
between,
to add
yeah.
to that?
So, I just want to, two things. So as you pointed out, Fran tells Niles that she gets this strange vibe from the wedding, and she explains that the last time I did a wedding with this level of excitement, it involved my cleaning girl and a green card.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and she adds, and even she picked, she had a song preference. I don't remember what it was. Um, and then kind of like right before when I was engaged to Danny comment, she says, "Be it Great Britain or Great Neck, women in love are all the same." That's Fran's assessment of it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's all I had.
Okay. So take us to the next scene.
So the next scene, we are again in the I guess the foyer, like by the front of the house, if you will. And Kenny has brought a box of more things for the wedding, and now it's the wedding day, and Fran is telling Kenny that not to
Um,
be. Oh, did I skip something?
yes.
Oh,
The night scene.
oh, why don't I let you do that one then?
Okay. So at night, that night, Fran is knocking on Maxwell's door insistently, and it's taking a while. And finally, he opens the door and obviously had just woken up. And Fran's like, "Oh, you couldn't sleep either?" And of course, Maxwell's kind of like, and Fran's like, your sister, you got to stop this wedding. Your sister's in love with Lester. And he's like, oh, really? When did she tell you this? And Fran's like, Oh, she doesn't even know. He doesn't even know. The only people who know are you and me. And
Right.
so Maxwell's just kind of like, oh, so yeah, he pretends to put like, yeah, yeah. So we need to go and wake up the house and, sort this out and, break up this wedding and all this kind of stuff as he's going back in his room and Fran follows him in and she's like, I'm so glad you're on the same page. And then immediately, she's kicked out. And she's like, oh yeah, yeah, we can talk about this in the morning. So that was just a really quick scene.
Right. Thank you.
Mhm.
So then the next day is the wedding day. And Fran tells Kenny, just because she's rich doesn't mean referring to Maggie, doesn't mean she can't fall for a schlub like you. And, anyway, then Gracie's there and Maxwell's there. And Fran says to Maxwell about Grace. Oh, sorry. Brighton swiped the part of the cherub off the cake or something, but he blamed Gracie, who says, I can't eat. I'm too nervous to eat, and Fran turns to Maxwell and says, she's very sensitive. She senses doom. And Maxwell rightly points out, Miss Fine, Grace senses doom at Disneyland.
Mhm.
So Fran and Maxwell continue the conversation that you referenced before about Lester and Jocelyn being in love with each other. And Maxwell basically is like, do not talk to Jocelyn. Don't ruin her wedding day. And so Fran, eventually agrees, promises not to say anything to Jocelyn. And then immediately, as soon as Maxwell turns away, she immediately goes over to Lester
Mhm.
and basically confronts him about his feelings. And he's like, are my feelings that obvious? And she says, well, to a trained eye. And he, sadly says, I could never presume to tell her such a thing. Miss Jocelyn is beyond my reach. She's backseat, I'm front seat.
Mhm.
And, he later says, Miss Jocelyn and me, it's just a fantasy. You see, I have nothing to offer. And Fran says, except your undying love. And he's defeated and says, well, if only that were enough.
Mhm.
He doesn't think it is.
Mhm.
Do you want to add anything to that scene? I know I sort of gave a short summary of it.
Yeah, no, it's fine because earlier when, Friend's trying to convince, he Maxwell's like, don't use reverse psychology on me. She's like, oh, sorry, I've obviously been reading too many books with Fabio on the cover.
Yep.
And then again, it's when she's telling Lester, Carpe diem, seize the day. And Kenny's walking by and he's like, oh, you speak Latin? And she's like, pig.
Mm-hmm.
But just a little side. So, I mean, it's interesting how Fran in this entire episode is encouraging both Kenny and Lester.
Right.
Um, so yeah. And then at the end of the scene, I noted that Fran was eating some shrimp,
She
which
was,
we can
yes.
discuss more later, but I saw that.
Yes, she comments on how, I think she says, meanwhile, the shrimp is to die for, or something like that.
Yeah.
She comments on how good it is.
hmm So if you're okay, I can
Go
take us
for
to.
it.
So we are now, it's later. Obviously, there's guests milling about in the living room. It's, all decorated. Cece is hanging on to Maxwell. like,
Very much.
has, like her arms around his arm, but like also kind of like snuggling, like her head's on his shoulder. And, she's kind of asking those prying questions like, oh, um, do you ever want to get married again? And he's like, yeah, like maybe lonely with the kids, all that kind of stuff. And um, Niles, I believe, oh, and Cece's like, oh, yeah, I always wanted a wedding. I think along those lines. And Niles is like, we all want what we can't have.
Correct.
A classic dig.
Yep.
Um, and then he also, um, I can't recall what goes into it, but Niles notes that Cece is making lazy circles in the sky. She's
Right.
always kind of around. Now, I'm not sure how you divvied up. Like that was just a very quick scene, and then I have the next stuff separate. So if we want to move on, you can
No,
take it if you want, but
yeah, I also sort of divided it in the same way. The only thing I'll say is it's sort of interesting to me how many people were available like a week later to go to a wedding.
yeah. And well, and here's the other thing is that if Jocelyn and the Duke live in London,
Yep,
presumably up until now, she hasn't visited, since Fran's been there because this is the first time Fran's meeting her in this episode.
correct.
And it's probably been close to a year since she's, been in the household. Like, who are these people?
Well, I have this note somewhere else. I can't remember where at the moment, but think about who isn't at the wedding.
The Worthingtons, I'm assuming, and the parents.
The parents. That I mean, yeah, they probably wouldn't invite the Worthingtons because they don't like the Worthingtons.
Mhm.
But like Jocelyn's parents aren't there. Nigel's parents probably aren't there. Like, who are all these people who are there? And like, what about the people who aren't? It's kind of weird,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So, um, I don't know if you count this as two separate scenes, but I counted them sort of together, so I'm going to do them together. We sort of see, Fran give Gracie the last minute pep talk, like go and splatter those petals. Oh, oops,
That
I'm
happens
sorry.
later.
That does happen later. I was like, I thought I wrote this down. I did. It's on the next page. Sorry. The next scene is in Maxwell's office, right?
Mhm.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So for some reason, Jocelyn's getting ready in Maxwell's office, and in comes Lester, and he says to her, "You look like an angel, miss." And we find out that he's coming to resign. That the Duke has his own staff, and he's not going to go with her to um, the Duke's home. And she tries to convince him otherwise, like, "Oh, of course you're coming with me. Your room, you'll have a great room. It has a view of the moat. You can barely hear the drawbridge." And
Mhm.
he basically declines. Um,
He can't
and
do it.
he can't do it, no. And so they shake hands, and like it looks like he's gonna leave, but he doesn't, and instead says, "May I kiss your hand, miss?" And her response is, "Please."
Mhm.
And so he kisses her hand, and he tells her, "I've been very happy in my work." And he's like kissing up her arm, and she tells him, "You'll be awfully hard to replace." And he's continuing to kiss up her arm. "I wish I could have done more for you, miss." And she says to him, "You're off to a jolly good start." And then
Mhm.
they kiss.
Mhm.
Ah!
Well, and the thing too, whenever they do the handshake, it's like the farthest away possible. Like their arms are fully stretched out, right?
Right.
And he turns to go, but she doesn't let go. And that's when he turns back and is like, "May I kiss your hand?"
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then again, he was channeling like Mr. Adams from the Adams family with kissing her up her arm.
Oh, I didn't get that. I
Well,
just
no,
thought
no,
it
no,
was
no. I mean, that's what it reminded me of. I don't know if you ever watched the Adams family, but he often like kissed up his wife's arm.
many, many moons ago. Now that you say that, that sounds somewhat familiar, but I wouldn't have
Hmm.
I wouldn't have been able to say that off the top of my head.
Hmm. Okay. So you have the other scene too?
Uh you can do the next scene. Sorry, I
Oh,
jumped
well,
the gun.
it's in the hallway. And Fran is, like you were saying, kind of doing her last minute pep talk to Gracie, like, "You've got this," kind of thing. So Gracie goes in to start throwing the flowers, but oh, where's the bride? So Fran opens the door to Maxwell's office and she sees Lester and Jocelyn kissing. And like one of those like really dramatic, like he has her in his arms and she's leaning back, kind of like
Mm-hmm.
romance novel cover kiss.
Yep.
And so she closes it and stuff, but Maxwell's coming to see where she is. And at first, Fran's kind of trying to get in the way, but he opens it, sees it as well, closes it. I mean, Lester and Jocelyn are in their own world. They don't even flinch when the door opens, those two times.
They don't
And
notice at all.
yeah, no, they're just totally enamored with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And Maxwell's like, did what did you do? Did you talk to her? And she's like, I didn't talk to her. And he's like, did you talk to Lester? And she's like, I talk to a million people a day. Like, who's to say?
Right. I can't remember
Um,
every Tom, Dick, and Harry.
yeah, yeah. And then so obviously though the wedding's supposed to be going on, and so she gets Kenny to go up to do his comedy routine because, as was mentioned last time and then was referenced a couple of times in this episode, he wants to do stand-up comedy. So she kind of puts him on the spot and is like, entertain you, because she's like, oh, for some prenuptial entertainment. Here's Kenny. And he's a good sport. He goes up.
And did you catch his opening line?
I don't have it written down, so.
So, how many of you have been bar mitzvahed?
Oh yeah.
Which
Mhm.
my guess is none of them.
Yeah. I mean, there's no response from the crowd that we see. So.
Exactly. One thing I want to add, when Maxwell went originally to the office and Fran tried to get in his way, he makes the comment, it's time to give her away. And Fran says, too late, she's already gone.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, Fran had said there were technical difficulties and Kenny was being pushed into the spotlight. And well, guess what? Nigel's a little curious about what's going on. So, what does he try to do?
Mhm. Oh, he tries to go into the office to see what's going on.
And what does Fran tell him?
You don't want to go in there?
Right. And he says, why not? And
And
did you catch what she told him?
no.
He says, why not? She says, it's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Well, guess what? He ignored that, opens the door, sees Lester and Jocelyn embracing, and he closes the door. And in response to Fran, he says, "I'll say."
Mhm.
Sorry, I enjoyed that wordplay.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, my handwriting's like I do have bad luck written down, but it's written down very quickly. So thank you for bringing that up.
You're very welcome.
Okay, so do you want to continue then?
Sure. Um, so now we're affirmatively in the office, and finally Lester and Jocelyn realize like they're not alone, and they Jocelyn sort of stammers a little, and Lester says, "I'm sorry, sir, we're in love." And Nigel said very primly, "Yes, I can see that. Thank you."
Mhm.
And Fran's like, "Wow, he's taking it well." And Nigel turns to her, "Can't you see I'm heartbroken?" The
Mhm.
emotion I just had in my voice was more than the emotion he had in his.
Yeah, he's like, "Can't you see I'm heartbroken?" Like it's very matter of fact. Like again, it's how he's been this entire episode.
Exactly.
So
Like,
to the audience, there's no discernible difference.
correct. But Maxwell says, "Really, Miss Fine, how insensitive." And she's like,
Mhm.
"Oh well, how are you supposed to know what you British are feeling? Do you all wear mood rings or something?"
Mhm.
Well, anyway, so back to the real uh, controversy, if you will. Jocelyn says, "Please say you'll forgive me," and Nigel says, "Well, it won't be easy, Joss. We did have a bit of fun together. Granted, not as much fun as you've had with the chauffeur." And he concludes that he's going to, "I shall bow out gracefully with my head held high." And Fran points out, you can sneak out that way, and points to the open door by by the office. And he says, "Better yet," and he sneaks out and says, "Ta."
Mhm.
Um,
Well, she goes, "All the best," and he goes, "Ta."
exactly. It's just like flat, and there's no emotion there. Um, and Maxwell sort of makes this point, like, I just wish you had found love with. Oh, so sorry. Um, Jocelyn seems concerned that maybe Maxwell's embarrassed or, ashamed of her, and he's not. He just wishes that Jocelyn had found, happiness with Lester 20 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, and Lester makes this comment, "Who knew you could find true love on the backseat of a car?" And Fran adds,
Mhm.
anyone that's still living at home with their parents."
Mhm.
And so, Lester, gets down on one knee and says, "I've been thinking it's a shame to waste all that food." And Jocelyn says, "Oh, Lester, the answer's yes, 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 yes." Finally, she has some excitement. Finally, she's happy.
Yeah. Still not like the most romantic way of asking.
No, I have this comment like, what kind
Ashamed
of
to waste
proposal?
all the food.
Exactly. Like, what kind of proposal is that?
Yeah. Um, but yeah, if you don't mind, I can continue then.
Please do.
So we go back into the living room where Kenny's wrapping up, like he's doing the punchline of his joke where essentially I can't remember all the bits, but no matter what, he's gonna be, according to his father, irritating. So it seems like people are enjoying it. Maggie's kind of like looking at him like, oh, and he mentions, oh, I have, a stand up at Benny's Clam Bar. Would you like to go? And she's like, oh yeah. And he's like, I lost all respect for you to her.
Yeah,
Just
I
kind of,
don't understand that.
yeah. And then like it was an odd beat just because like what was he just kind of just joking, or like is he really no longer interested? I don't know. It didn't really dwell on that.
Yeah,
But Fran comes in and she's like, oh, the show must go on. Like Maxwell's walking, she puts Lester at the front and she notes that, okay, the bride's side can stay, the groom's side can leave.
right. And they can pick up their
Get a
gifts
goodie
on the
bag
way
on the
out.
way out.
Yep.
Yeah. And show must go on. So then in comes Maxwell with Jocelyn. Fran is taking pictures. She's so happy. And then we see that Niles is crying. And Fran's like, Niles, you crying? I thought, you're British. And he's like, well, I'm part French.
Right.
So obviously, I mean, Niles knows Jocelyn well because they grew up together, presumably, since he
Mhm.
has that connection with Maxwell. Did you have anything to add for that little scene?
No,
Okay.
no.
I will note that I was like to myself, I was like, what about the marriage license? Like, this wouldn't work, but okay.
This is TV. You've got to suspend your disbelief sometimes.
I know. So take
Um,
us to the kitchen.
so uh, it's now after the wedding, and Fran is like putting things away, and Maxwell comes in and says something like, "You left this," and he's holding the bouquet. Um, and he says, "Cece almost ran off with it. Nice catch, by the way." And Fran says, I've been a bridesmaid so many times I could out jump the shack."
Yeah, because he immediately, like, when he went into the kitchen, he threw it to her and she caught it. And
She did.
that's when he mentions, like, Cece almost ran off with it.
Right. Um, and so, Fran's putting like saran wrap over a large slab of wedding cake.
Mm-hmm.
And, the two of them are talking about like, to think they almost missed their chance. I know, in this day and age, for two people to rule out love just because of class. And Maxwell says, imagine being blind to the fact that you love someone just because they work for you. And she's like, I know, it's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
And then they say goodnight and like they both leave. And Maxwell turns back and looks at her. And Fran has one last glance at him.
Mm-hmm. But they miss seeing each other. Like,
Correct.
so it's like he turns first, turns back, then she kind of looks back. But what's cute is that, as you mentioned, she's wrapping up this large slab of cake and he kind of just takes it and puts it in the refrigerator for her. It's like very comfortable, domestic kind of, interaction.
Right. They're on the same wavelength. And
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of like they have a routine, kind of like what you were talking about when we did the episode Here Comes the Brood, which Cece, walked into and really objected to. But like Fran and Maxwell and the kids, they have a routine going down. They work as a family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, it's just kind of a nice little scene. And then the closing scene, like for the end credits, is just some bloopers again. Where it's the back at the dining scene, like the dinner where they're having the steak and kidney pie, and Fran's kind of just messing up her lines, and they're laughing along. And the actress who plays Gracie's just like, "See, it's contagious," because apparently they must have all been kind of like messing up in that scene. So yeah, but that in a nutshell is the episode.
Do you have any points you want to talk about before we jump into our shticks?
Just how I noted. I mean, again, logistically, not going to work, but narratively, it's very cute. And also, again, you see all the parallels throughout with the
Right.
different potential couples. Did you have any kind of overarching things you wanted to discuss prior to getting into the shticks?
I don't think so. I just always like to ask before I jump into something in case
I
you have something.
appreciate it.
Where would you like to start today?
Let's just go order. Let's go with fashion first.
Excellent choice.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned some of the fashion was tied to certain scenes. So we kind of already um, hit some of the ones, but a memorable outfit was definitely that I have in my notes just as pink newspaper print suit
Yep.
because it really does look like a suit, except that the print and the color are pretty loud, but um, not anything I would wear. It's just very memorable.
It is very memorable. I agree.
But the other thing that was kind of I wanted to talk about was the wedding dress,
Yes.
just because, like, to me, it looked so like fake. I don't like
It
it
looked
looked
cheap.
like a dress up. Yes, it looked kind of like a dress up. Like when I was younger, Fisher Price had one of their little dress up kits, and it was like a little bridal one. And I was like, the fabric looks similar to that. So it's not what you would expect, especially for a wedding between, Jocelyn and a duke. So
Yeah. You would also think, even though they said they wanted to keep it simple, you would think that money would not be an issue here. So,
yeah,
like,
you wouldn't
yeah,
have to go with the knockoff of the copy of the whatever.
exactly.
But I guess that also kind of may be indicative of like her enthusiasm or lack thereof, talking about Jocelyn for the whole endeavor. She's just like, sure, whatever. Whatever, I'll leave the details to you, she told Fran earlier. So she's
Right.
just kind of going along with it.
Right.
Was there
Yeah.
anything
No,
yeah, go
I
ahead.
also wanted to comment on the dress. I didn't like it because for the exact same reason you didn't like it, because I thought it looked cheap and it wasn't, it just wasn't great.
Mhm.
So I was just not a fan. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, there's that. Um, can we talk about what the other people wore to the wedding?
sure.
So I want to talk about Maxwell's um suit, tux. I'm not sure what to call it.
Mhm.
Um,
It looks very British, like
okay,
what you
is
see at the royal wedding kind of thing.
oh interesting.
Because
I didn't even
the
make
duke's
that
wearing the same thing.
right. Um, I didn't think of it as British. I just thought of it as not great. I didn't like it. Um, so like, is it sort of like a navy? It's not black. It has tails, I believe, at the back, or at least a
Mhm.
very long sport coat. And then, is it a tie? I'm not sure, but it's
Mm,
like if a norm.
cravat? I don't know.
I don't know
It's
what
not quite.
it yeah,
I
it's not a normal tie. It's thick and it has stripes, and then underneath
it's like
the
double kind of thing. Like
yeah,
there's Yeah, I'm not well versed in British men's fashion, so
yeah, I'm not either. But the only other thing I'll mention is that under the sport coat is a very, what to me looked like a very low cut vest,
Hmm.
which I thought should have been cut less deep. I just did not like it.
I didn't mind it just because it felt very British royalty kind of or upper class to me. Because the
Okay.
Duke's wearing like the exact same thing. But yeah, I mean, yeah, good to point out because it was not your classic like tux or anything like that.
Correct. And as I said, did not like it.
That's
So,
fair. Yeah,
um, can we talk about what Fran wore to the wedding?
sure.
So Fran is wearing it has like a corset top and it's sort of red. So it's like a beige, and then there's the corset top. It's a red velvet looking skirt. I don't really care for this outfit.
So it made me think of like a female pirate princess.
Yeah, I kind of
Or
see
like
that.
some type of historical, like a combination. Um, I didn't mind like the top too much or anything, but it also didn't seem appropriate for the event. It seemed kind of out of place.
Like sort of too informal.
Well,
Like,
again, pirate princess, like I don't
okay,
know. It like just doesn't seem. I mean, I could see her wearing that maybe for like Halloween or something. I don't know. Like more of a
interesting.
costume type of kind of situation.
Yeah, I don't care for it. Yeah, I'm not a fan. I will. I think I have two other wedding related fashion things, and
Okay,
then
go for it.
I'll let you talk about other fashion you want to talk about if that's okay. One is, did you notice that I believe Maggie is wearing a white bridesmaid dress? Um, which
Yeah,
is interesting. So like most weddings that I've attended, the bridesmaids are not also wearing white.
that's
Um,
true.
so
Mhm.
as a historical note, I think it's cool that Maggie was wearing white because originally bridesmaids would wear the same color as the bride because
Oh,
to ward off evil spirit, not even to ward off evil spirits, but basically to like if any like goblins or evil spirits or whoever fantastical beast, it's been a while since I read this, but whatever fantastical evil creature was going to try to curse the bride, it would have a harder time figuring out who the bride was.
yeah.
So
Kind of like a body double.
exactly. So like all these young women are dressed the
Boy
same.
bride.
Exactly. So yeah. And then the last wedding attire thing I'll point out is Kenny's powder blue suit.
Yes. He said that Sunny Bono was having a yard sale.
Correct. I was also not a fan of that suit.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's a powder blue suit that looks like it's from the 60s. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I didn't have a ton of, like I said, um, there are some memorable outfits to me, but not like anything that sticks out like as a favorite.
Hmm.
I will note that that little scene between Fran and Maxwell, whenever she knocks on his door in the middle of the night to talk about everything. She's wearing a robe that we've seen before. That's a floral robe. And then Maxwell's wearing like blue and white striped PJs, which I think you had mentioned in a previous episode, like made you think growing up that that's what like men wore to
Yep.
bed, right?
Yep. I'm still
So,
partial to men wearing pajamas like that. So
mhm. Yeah. So, yeah. I don't really have anything else for the fashion.
I
So,
do. I
okay,
do.
go for it.
So my favorite outfit in this episode is what Fran is wearing when she has that conversation with Gracie, where Gracie's afraid they're going to have to shoot Aunt Jocelyn. So she's wearing a red dress with like a on top of a black shirt and black tights and black stiletto heels.
Oh, yeah, that looked good on her.
I thought it was fantastic. I would totally wear that. Maybe not the heels, but yeah, in a past life I would have. And then also the dress Gracie's wearing in that scene, it's sort of a patterned dress with short poofy sleeves. Pretty sure I had a number of dresses like that when I was Gracie's age. So
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. There was a certain look to the early 90s.
exactly. Um, so that I think is all I had for fashion.
Okay. So can we move on to notable New Yorkers?
Yes, we can.
So there's numerous references, some of which we've already kind of mentioned in our summary, a
Yep.
recap. But for sure, I mean, okay, Hound of the Basker.
Hound
How
of
is
the
it actually
Baskervilles.
titled? Yeah, well, it's a Sherlock Holmes story.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So I
The
can't remember exactly how Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote it, but the Baskerville reference, Hound of the Baskerville or whatever. Sorry, my friend who loves that. You know what I'm talking about. That's a reference.
Yeah, for
And then,
those of us who have not read it, according to Wikipedia, it's the third of four crime novels written, as you mentioned, by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle that features Sherlock Holmes. And this one tells the story of an attempted murder inspired by a supernatural, legendary evil hound.
mm-hmm.
So,
So poor Jocelyn was briefly compared to that.
correct.
Now, whenever you mentioned that they're having the whole, oh, Duke of Salisbury gets together with whatever Worcester, I can't say that word either. And occasionally the Earl of Sandwich joins them, and Fran makes a comment like, oh, it's like Benny Hill, I never got it. And Benny Hill's an English actor, comedian, singer, and writer. um let's see here. I know there's like a ton. I'm sorry. I'm just like going through my my notes here.
Yeah, there were
Lady
a lot.
Diana is a reference to Princess Diana, who I mean, I would hope everybody's aware of, but was the mother of William and Harry,
Yep,
and tragically died in the late 90s. Um, and then there is when Kenny comes into the home and he's kind of looking around in awe, and he says, "Where's Ellie Mae and Jethro?"
yep,
And I believe that's a reference to the Beverly Hillbillies.
I believe so as well.
And then Fran, in response, kind of mentions like Siegfried and Roy, which I believe has been referenced before on the
Yes, they
Nanny.
have. Yes, they
Um,
have.
and let's see here. Goodwill Blimp. That's not that fun. Um, Baby, You Could Drive My Car, I believe is by the Beatles, right?
That was my belief as well.
Yeah.
The other songs that were referenced were Evergreen, which is a song by Barbara Streisand, and is apparently the love theme from the love theme song from A Star Is Born, which
Okay.
also I believe starred Barbara Streisand.
Hmm.
Um, Close to You is another option, which I believe was a song by Burt Bacharach and Hal David. And then there's hmm?
There's also, isn't there, the Carpenters close to you?
There very well may be. I
Yeah.
I sort of jumped to the Burt Bacharach because spoiler, I believe Burt Bacharach is on the Nanny. He comes
Oh, okay. Okay, so that makes sense.
so that's why I jumped to that. Um,
Okay.
there's also the song Duke of Earl, which was by Gene Chandler, I believe. Um, and then the song You Better Shop Around was by The Miracles.
Hmm.
Um, and you mentioned Drive My Car by the Beatles.
Hmm. Yeah. And then later, Fran mentions Fabio,
Yep.
who was famously in a lot of like romance novels. He has glorious long hair. Um, Although, like, do you remember that one time he got hit by a bird while riding a roller coaster?
No.
Okay, that happened.
Okay.
That was a
I
quick aside.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Um,
Then Fran also mentions that she's not going to be the one banging on the church door screaming Elaine. And that, I believe, is a reference to the movie The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman.
yep, that
Um,
was what I guessed too.
okay. Okay, we're on the same page then. um, I still think, do you know when um is Dead Poet Society prior to this? Yeah, that's 1989. Because okay, in general, carpe diem is its own Latin phrase. But the whole seize the day, carpe diem kind of thing is also very reminiscent of the movie Dead Poet Society with Robin
Mhm.
Williams. Um, which I would assume is where kind of Fran picked that up from, but that, I could be wrong. Um, yeah. So,
I had a couple more.
okay. You can go for it. I'll still comb through mine.
There was a reference to Dionne Warwick. I can't remember what the reference was, but according to Wikipedia, Dionne Warwick is an American singer, television host, and former Goodwill ambassador for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN.
Yeah.
Y-
I believe too, she is now on Twitter and has some pretty funny tweets, just as an aside.
Excellent.
Yes.
So Fran references Barney when she's talking to Lester, saying, "You love her, she loves you." And she's like, "Oh, I've been watching too much Barney." Barney is a purple dinosaur.
Oh, I thought she said, oh, okay. That makes sense. Because at first I thought she said Bonnie. And I was like, was that like a talk show host that I was not familiar with? But yes, Barney makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, it was Barney. Now, for all of our wonderful listeners, you'll go to sleep singing yourself, "I love you, you love me, we're a great big family." And
We're a
the rest of
happy.
happy family? Oh, see, it's been a long time since I've watched
I don't
Barney.
know. Okay. Moving on.
Yeah. Anyway, let's see. So you already mentioned that in the scene where Cece is, cuddling up to Maxwell, uh, Niles makes a comment that she's making lazy circles in the sky, which I don't know if this is the reference, but that's a line from the song Oklahoma in the show Oklahoma.
Oh, okay.
Which, if you recall, on the episode with Brock Storm, the name of which is Personal Business, is escaping me for a moment. In Personal Business, that's the song he was singing during his audition, and he couldn't spell Oklahoma.
Yep.
Fran, when Maxwell asks Fran if she spoke to Nigel, spoke to Lester. Wow, let me just flip all the people's names. When he asked her if she spoke to Lester, she says, "I don't remember every Tom, Dick, and Harry," which is apparently a common placeholder for like unknown named people, unknown people. But
Yeah.
there's also a song Tom, Dick, or Harry, which I believe is in the show Kiss Me Kate.
Mm-hmm.
I believe,
Okay.
but I could be
So,
wrong.
um, do you have more? Because I realized what was standing right in front of me that I didn't talk
Go
about.
for it.
So, do you know who plays the actress who plays Jocelyn?
I Googled it, so I do, but please tell our listeners.
It's Twiggy, the famous model from, I believe, the 60s. Yeah, she was a British cultural icon and prominent teenage model during the swinging 60s in London, according to Wikipedia.
Interesting.
Because
I
I
think
knew, like, I was like, she seems familiar, but at the very end in the credits, they mentioned, like, they note her as a guest star. And I was like, yes, that makes sense.
so.
She was on like Project Runway, I think. Not Project Runway. America's Next Top Model in the earlier season. She like came on, I think, a couple of times to guest judge, maybe. It's been a while.
Interesting. I think she also had a career on Broadway. Is that possible?
Let's check Wikipedia.
Yeah, according to Wikipedia, um, let's see. She embarked on, and I quote, she embarked on an award-winning acting and singing career, starring in a variety of roles on stage and screen, and recording albums. Um, I remember watching a Broadway program and her name coming up. But more importantly, the reason that it's so cool that she's on the show is there's a shirt that Fran wears called the Twiggy Vest.
Hmm.
Um, which I believe we've already seen. It's multicolored, it's striped. Yeah, we've seen it multiple times. She's been wearing it with like a white shirt. It's
Hmm.
the yellow, red,
Yeah.
black, pink, striped vest.
Hmm.
It's a very famous vest that actually Fran Drescher recently was photographed wearing.
Oh, interesting.
And by
I did
recently,
not.
I mean like this year.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Nice. Um, Fun side note is I'm not familiar really, sorry, to the actors who played Nigel and Lester, but I was just looking and what's funny is that the actor who plays Nigel, the Duke of Salisbury, is born was born in Georgia, which made me think of how you mentioned that the actor who plays Niles is also a Southern man.
huh.
So that's just like a little fun fact. But my question to you, Debbie,
Oh
is
no.
when you hear the phrase The show must go on. What's your first, like, where does your mind go in terms of references?
The Nanny.
To the nanny? Okay. Fair enough. Mine
Sorry.
goes mine goes to Queen. The band Queen singing The Show Must
Oh,
Go On.
interesting.
It's obviously, like, used in so many different forms of media. Like, it's a very common phrase. But I was just curious, like, where your mind went when you heard that phrase.
Yeah, it's actually the title of that episode a few weeks ago that we talked about where Gracie stars in her
Yeah,
school production. So that's where my mind goes.
interesting.
My mind usually goes to the nanny. Like
Yeah.
I quote it with some regularity. Like, and by that I mean pretty much every day.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have anything else for notable New Yorkers?
I do not think so.
Okay. So, Yiddish a cup?
Absolutely. Okay, so only a handful of things today. You already flagged that Mazel Tov is pip pip in Yiddish, means congratulations. Um, Fran references when she's going through the list of things that need to be decided for the wedding, yarmulkes. That is another word would be a kippah or kippot would be plural. So a yarmulke is a skull cap that is worn by, well, typically men. Um, for very observant Jewish men, they wear it all the time. For women who are married, they often will use a yarmulke or kippah or something else to cover their heads. I actually was reading a whole thing about where the direction for wearing a yarmulke comes from, which I will not get into because no one probably cares. But yeah, so that's the skull cap that you see Jewish men wearing usually in synagogue or if they are super religious all the time. As you already pointed out, we see Fran eat shrimp and Kenny delivers shrimp, baby lobster tails, and cracked crab. Not one of those things is kosher. So I find it interesting that those are the foods being eaten. Fran refers to Kenny as a schlub, which is basically like a worthless person, kind of a slobby person, like someone who you wouldn't be like a talentless or unattractive boorish person. Like bleh. And then I mentioned that Kenny's opening line of his stand-up uh, special is what I wanted to call it, but his stand-up routine is how many of you have been bar mitzvahed? We've already talked about being bar mitzvahed. It means son of commandment. It's when a boy turns 13 and becomes responsible for his own activities. So did you catch any other Yiddish words that I just totally glazed over?
I don't believe so. At least nothing
Awesome.
comes to mind. So good. So 90s nostalgia?
There are actually a couple things here beyond the wonderful old cars that I need to sneak in.
Mhm.
Would you like to go first?
No, you can go first.
Um, Maxwell was writing letters to Jocelyn.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, I mean, as long as I can remember, people have commented on the dead art of letter writing.
Mhm.
And, it's sort of refreshing that he was writing to her. I'm not quite
Mhm.
sure how you mail things internationally, but he was doing it.
Mhm. You
Um,
can.
I'm sure you can. I just never have had to.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, and then I think you previously mentioned that Fran kept her Rolodex.
Mhm.
Do you want to tell our young listeners what a Rolodex is?
Well, it's where you would put all your you could flip through it and you'd have all the little cards with the contact information. So if you need to look up a phone number or an address, um, you would just kind of flip through and it was typically alphabetical order. So depending on what kind of Rolodex you had, there were some that were like cylindrical that you could flip through. Others were just kind of like in a little box. Like I think it kind of varied, right?
Yeah, I think Rolodex itself was the flippy one. And then the
Yeah.
other ways to keep business cards were alternatives.
hmm So essentially, yeah, you would have to write it down and bring it with you. And it wasn't just saved in your phone.
That is the key. It was not saved to your contacts on your phone.
Mm-hmm. And I guess accordions must have been a thing.
I had no idea.
But yeah, I think, the reference to Lady Diana just seems very 90s to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, just me personally. Again, Fran takes a photo um, with, a camera, not a phone at the wedding. And you don't see a bunch of people holding stuff up. I feel like these days, if you go to a wedding, everybody has like their phone up taking pictures.
Oh, interesting.
Whereas, like, I don't think like people just brought cameras with them to the weddings, like, back in the day. How you had like your just designated photographer.
Right.
That
I
could just
mean,
be my limited experience with that too, but
yeah, I mean, I guess I definitely noted when Fran took the picture of Jocelyn being walked down the aisle, and I thought, well, that's a little weird that Fran's acting as photographer. Like they should have had a photographer. But I guess also when you get married with 1 week notice, it's really hard to find a photographer.
well, and we've seen before, she's very enthusiastic with her camera in
Yes,
terms of like trying to preserve memories.
and that will continue. Spoiler.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, aside from the fashion was very 90s in certain respects that you kind of mentioned as well. Uh, did you have anything else?
I don't think so.
Okay. So give us some future fun, Debbie.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out where I want to start because I have so many things. I promise I'm going to walk this line appropriately. Okay. So we are going to meet Maxwell's baby brother in season 3. He will return in season 5, as just does Jocelyn. And in between, we also meet Maxwell's parents. I will say that Jocelyn is not played by Twiggy in future episodes.
Oh, interesting.
So that's interesting. I did not realize that it was Twiggy who played her here until we started talking about it. So that's point one. Point two, Jocelyn is not the only Sheffield who marries outside of her class. She's also not the only Sheffield to marry someone who works for them. This is not the only wedding or other event that is hosted at the Sheffield home. I can think of 2 other weddings that we see on the Nanny, and the wedding dresses in both of those look better. One of which they look more real. They look less cheap. One of them, I know, I read a piece about fashion on the Nanny, is an actual wedding dress and cost a lot of money, like wedding dresses tend to do.
Yeah.
Let me think. What else did I want to mention? Your Fabio, there's actually an episode, I believe in season 5, where we have a Fabio lookalike who is involved who at the center of many events. I feel like as we were talking, I said to myself, oh, don't forget to say this. And I haven't the faintest idea what I was going to say. So that bodes well. Yeah. No, maybe it'll come to me as we're talking. But yeah, I think those are some good things to note, that we will see better bridal fashion.
Okay, good. Yeah, because like I said, this one just came off very much like dress up, not
Yeah.
real. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know.
It's also not very attractive.
And Twiggy's a model. So, like, you know that if even on her it looks fake, then it's not a great
Right.
outfit.
Oh, I guess I'll also mention there are later references to Ellie Mae Clampett, who's the character reference from the Beverly Hillbillies. That was definitely not what I was trying to tell myself to remember to say, but
It's okay.
oh well.
I'm sure you'll remember in the future.
I'm
It could be
sure
a
it'll
little
come to me.
podcast connection.
I'm sure it will come to me probably at like 4 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. It'll be
Oh,
delightful. Um, so I think it's time for us to rate the episode for our
mhm,
wonderful listeners. You may recall we rate each episode on a scale of 1 to 5 lipsticks. Is it my
mhm.
turn or your turn? I can
It's
never
your
remember.
turn.
It's my
It's your
turn.
turn. Uh-huh.
Okay. Um, so in case you couldn't tell from the intonation of my voice, I do really like this episode. Um, I think it's fun when we meet other members of either the Fine family or the Sheffield family. I like the love story between Lester and Jocelyn. Um, we will hear more about it later. Um, Maybe that was what I wanted to say. That we'll hear more about their love story later. I
Well,
won't
that's
say
good.
I won't say what we hear or whether it's good or bad, but we get one tidbit um, at the end of season 5. Um, I really like this episode, but at the same time, it's also not one I like. It's not one that I think of wanting to like go back and watch all the time. Unlike episodes we've talked about previously, like Here Comes the Brood or A Plot for Nanny. So I think I'm going to give it a 4.5 because I can't bring myself to give it a 5. I also can't bring myself to give it a 4. So I'm giving it a
Mhm.
4.5.
Fair enough.
How about you?
I think I'm actually gonna give it a 5.
Is this
I
like the
know.
first time I think this might be the first time. No, this is not the
No,
first time.
no, because I miss 5 to that doesn't make sense. I gave the second episode a 5, but really, in retrospect, that is not a 5. So since then, this is my first 5, though. So,
Okay.
well,
And
again, I'm a sucker for you know, a a romance plot. And um I did appreciate that scene in the kitchen at the end as well. So, again, there are a couple of things here and there I wasn't super, you know, into,
Mhm.
but still overall, I think I'll still give it a 5. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, I guess that's all we have for you today. We hope you had a fine time with us as we revisited The Nanny. Join us next week when we'll be discussing episode 18, Sunday in the Park with Fran.
If you would like to reach us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at Nanny Revisited. You can also send us email at a fine time nanny revisited at gmail.com. Have a great week.